I know we're happy to be here in quiet, calm New York and not in Washington, D.C. Just think we could be dealing with issues there. So we're going to focus on New York City. I'm Elise Wagner. I'm the co-chair of the Land Use Department here at Kramer Levin. Happy to welcome you all here today. And it has been actually quite an exciting year in New York City land use. There have been major changes in the New York City zoning resolution and related state laws that have unlocked new development and conversion opportunities for our clients. This is happening at a time when we finally seem to be exiting the pandemic era. EDC's recent report on the state of New York City's economy tells us that after losing nearly 1 million jobs in 2020, New York City has record high employment as of the third quarter of 2024. Office demand appears to be stabilizing. Average daily occupancy of offices in the New York City metro area is still at roughly 50% of pre-pandemic levels, but office vacancy declined in the second and third quarter of 2024 for the first time since the pandemic. And as we all know, there's high demand for Class A office buildings. Their occupancy is at 91% of pre-pandemic levels. And residential sales of new units in Manhattan reached pre-pandemic numbers in late 2024. Let's see, this is not going to the next slide, so I'm not going to worry about it. Somebody can come up and help.
This was working before.
All right, well, I can keep talking.
Yep.
Go ahead. The city and state in their land use policies have been focused on the twin challenges of housing supply and affordability. The number of jobs in New York City grew by 25% from 2011 to 2023, but the number of housing units increased by only 11%. Meaning that the city gained 895,000 jobs, but just 353,000 housing units. As a result, we have record low vacancy rates and record high prices. Both the city and the state have taken major steps over the past year to encourage housing production. Let's start with the state. One very important move by the state was the removal of the 12 FAR residential cap in the multiple dwelling law, subject to some restrictions. Some of us had lost hope that this would ever happen since there was virulent opposition in the past. But the politics have shifted and there's recognition that density by itself is not necessarily a bad thing. The state also created new tax incentives to replace the old 421A program. There's 485X for affordable housing for new construction and 467M, a very good program for affordable housing in conversions. At the city level, the City of Yes initiative is the most comprehensive zoning change since 1961, when the current zoning resolution was enacted. It was in 3 parts. The first was City of Yes for carbon neutrality, which the City Council adopted in December 2023. Then there was City of Yes for economic opportunity, which the Council adopted in June 2024. And City of Yes for housing opportunity, which the Council adopted recently in December 2024. Are we able to move the slides? Okay, so we're going to try to get it working. Okay, so next on our agenda, after I finish this introduction, Paul Selver will give an overview of the highlights of City of Yes for housing opportunity. Then Patrick Sullivan and Jim Power will discuss the new affordable housing framework. Valerie Campbell and Sheila Posen will discuss the new framework for transferring development rights from individual landmarks. And Jean Travers will discuss what City of Yes for housing opportunity means for residential conversions. The city is also moving forward with several major neighborhood rezonings. You'll be hearing about Midtown South, Long Island City, and other rezonings from Jeff Mulligan, Adam Taubman, and Jessica Christie. In addition, the city initiated the Green Fast Track program to expedite environmental review of small and medium-sized residential developments. Tony Finger will be describing how Green Fast Track works. And our agenda will be completed by a discussion on the state of the market with two of our favorite real estate colleagues, Dan Berman and Andy Charles. There will be Q&A at the end. Before we dive into the program, I want to thank our paralegals, Riley Zook and Carlin Maximuk, who are so helpful in everything we do in the land use department. And I also want to thank Jane Selecchia and her team in the marketing department for helping us put this panel together. Finally, I want to make sure that you know about some exciting things that are happening here at Kramer Levin. Jim Power is now the co-chair of the land use department with me. Sheila Pozan was promoted to partner, and Pat Sullivan was promoted to counsel. Also, we're in merger talks with the global law firm Herbert Smith Freehills, which has its headquarters in London and Sydney. We're working toward a May 2025 launch date of the combined firm, which will operate in the U.S. under the name HSF Kramer. Our New York City-based land use practice will continue to focus on the 5 boroughs, but we're pleased that Herbert Smith Freehills has a very well-regarded land use practice in London, Australia, and beyond. We're excited to see what new opportunities this merger will create for our firm and our clients. So there are many reasons for optimism. As you'll hear, there's a lot of potential for development in New York City, and not surprisingly, many challenges. Paul?
Thank you, Elise. There is, as Elise noted, a lot to get your arms around in City of Yes, including City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. It includes zoning amendments that range from major policy initiatives to small but important technical fixes, all intended to facilitate the creation of every kind of housing at every price point in every neighborhood of the city. We'll try today to demystify one set of these changes, those that affect residential development in the city's medium to high density communities. I'll begin by summarizing the high points of the legislation with some greater detail on a few of them. My colleagues will then take over for, as we say, a deeper dive into those portions of the new text that are most likely to generate new housing, and for a look to the future rezonings of area-wide remappings that will help implement City of Yes. So City of Yes had as its initial stated goal facilitating the construction or preservation of about 100,000 housing units over the next 10 years. To achieve this goal, it laid out an ambitious agenda for change. It created a new program to incentivize affordable housing, the Uniform Affordability Preference, that could be used in most of the city's neighborhoods. It expanded substantially the opportunities to convert non-residential buildings. It established zoning districts R11 and R12 that permit residential floor area ratios above 12, implementing the changes in state law. It increased apartment density in all of the city's multifamily districts and eliminated barriers to shared housing. And it reduced, and in many cases eliminated, mandated parking minimums. It freed space within permitted building envelopes for apartments by exempting some building common spaces from zoning floor area. It established a set of new bulk controls and gave builders the option of developing under either the new controls or the longstanding height factor zoning. It increased opportunities for the transfer of landmarks development rights, and it simplified the process for using them. And it included numerous technical fixes that cleaned up or updated the zoning resolution for the 21st century environment. From the outset, it was reasonably predictable that there would be some pushback from both the development industry on the one hand and civic and neighborhood groups on the other. Key issues for the development community were changes to the structure of the affordable housing incentives, especially in the highest density zoning districts, the impact of building envelope regulations as originally proposed, and a variety of smaller, more technical problems. Concerns from neighborhood and civic groups focused on the impact primarily, but not entirely, in the lower density zoning districts of the proposed elimination of parking requirements, the proposed building heights, an increase in density along local town center retail corridors, near mass transit stations, and on housing campuses, the allowance for ancillary dwelling units in single-family districts, and the liberalization and procedural simplification of landmark development rights transfers. So let's start a little more detail with affordable housing. The text replaced the existing inclusionary housing programs with the uniform affordability preference. UAP was implemented through an allowance for additional floor area for affordable housing, generally 20% of the market rate floor area ratio. The text retained mandatory inclusionary housing for all land use actions to which it had previously been applied, which means as a practical matter that the rezonings that we're going to see to R11 or R12 districts and their commercial equivalent will be subject to MIH, with affordable housing to be provided at the percentage of floor area, 20, 25, or 30%, required by the city council. UAP has the potential to work well with rental housing, where the additional affordable units make up what is required to qualify for the 485X tax exemption. And in fact, the structure of the program was predicated on the Department of City Planning's belief that the tax exemption, rather than bonus floor area, was the inducement to create affordable housing. The real estate board challenged that belief in discussions with the city, noting that the floor area bonuses available under the former inclusionary housing program were often needed to induce condominium developers who were not eligible for the tax exemption to create any affordable housing. And that's going to be one of how much affordable housing gets created in the context of condo development is going to be one of the more interesting things that we're going to be watching for over the next couple of years. But I've only scratched the surface. Pat Sullivan and Jim Power will take on this topic in greater detail immediately after I finish. Turning to parking, and it's too bad that we don't have the little clicker in the screens. Do we have it? Do we have it? This one is actually useful.
You can advance it from here as well.
How?
These arrows.
No, you can't. Bear with us one sec. There we go. Done. Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you. And this is this is forward.
Right, one side to one
Okay.
forward. Yep.
Okay, here we go. This was just the repeat of the summary. So this is important for parking. It makes it a lot more understandable. There was, before City of Yes, no required parking in Manhattan below 110th Street on the west side and 96th Street on the east side or in Long Island City. The original City of Yes proposal was very dramatic. It would have ended the requirement for parking for new constructions and conversions everywhere in the city. The City Council modified that original proposal so that all required residential parking would be eliminated in the areas shown in purple and deep blue on the map. That is Manhattan south of Inwood, downtown Greenpoint, Williamsburg, Bushwick, and Brownstone, Brooklyn, and Long Island City and much of Astoria and Queens. In neighborhoods that were further from the Manhattan core but still well served by mass transit, denominated the outer transit zone and shown in turquoise on the map, parking requirements were reduced for new market rate housing, and they were eliminated for affordable and senior housing, conversions, ancillary dwelling units, transit-oriented developments, and smaller town center projects. And in the areas shown in green on the map, required minimums were maintained for market rate housing, reduced for affordable and senior housing, and eliminated for conversions, ancillary dwelling units, and smaller town center developments. In addition to these changes, City of Yes established a new set of bulk controls. Uh, Under pre-City of Yes zoning, the primary residential bulk controls encouraged taller, lower site coverage buildings, required open space for building residents in R6 through R9 zones, and were governed by a sky exposure plan and tower regime that reflected the bias of the drafters of the 1961 zoning resolution toward towers in the park. The City of Yes controls were based on the prior quality housing rules involving lower buildings, higher site coverage, but refined those rules to allow for taller buildings on, among other kinds of sites, those that were larger, those that were more physically or contextually challenged, and those that provided affordable housing. The new bulk rules provide an envelope for UAP housing in zones where height factor zoning cannot accommodate the additional floor area, and they also facilitate, not entirely, as you will hear, infill development on the larger campus sites. The first draft of the City of Yes text provided that these new controls would replace entirely the height factor zoning that we've been using for the last 50, 60 years. However, the Real Estate Board argued successfully that height factor zoning and controls should be preserved as an alternate set of regulations, not unlike the way quality housing served as an alternate to height factor zoning before the approval of City of Yes. City of Yes, and this chart shows you the heights, the heights that building heights that are allowed in the different districts under City of Yes and how they increase on high sites that provide affordable housing, sites that are have special conditions, and very large sites, those of over 40,000 feet. City of Yes also contained a number of below the radar provisions to make development of new market rate housing more attractive. Among the most important of these are a series of exclusions from zoning floor area. Some of the exclusions, those that permit taller terrace or balcony enclosures without increasing floor area, and those that exclude from floor area space used for fire department equipment storage, are somewhat technical in nature. Others more directly incentivize residential development by excluding portions of building common spaces, public corridors, amenity space, including what is now required recreation space in all residential buildings, trash storage, and ramps for access to ground floor apartments from zoning floor area. These exemptions, which can amount to easily 10% of a building's floor area, leave an increased amount of building gross floor area available for apartments. And significantly, they are available to alterations and conversions of existing buildings, as well as to new developments and enlargements. Finally, for those projects that were planned and want to proceed under the prior law, City of Yes has vesting provisions that were more liberal than those that are generally applicable. It's well established that the changes may be made to projects that are under construction at the time of a zoning change, so long as those changes conform to and comply with the new adopted zoning. It is equally well established that changes that were permitted under prior law, but not the newly adopted rules, can only be made if the project has acquired vested rights. The statutory rule in New York City has been that vesting occurs upon the completion of foundations pursuant to a validly issued permit for the entire building on or before the effective date of the applicable zoning amendment. The common law test is more flexible, but it also requires substantial construction as of the date of the zoning amendment as a predicate for vesting. The results of these, unfortunately, are too often unfair because of the extended length of time projects spend overcoming the challenges in their pre-development phase. The Real Estate Board has been pushing for some time and argued here for a more liberal vesting standard for City of Yes changes, one that recognized the many hurdles faced in pre-development, and one that I think we on the board hope will become at least a model for what could happen to the general vesting in New York City. And while it was unable to get everything that it asked for, it was successful in making the test that was ultimately adopted significantly more liberal than the existing statutory standard, More specifically, the City of Yes rule is that projects are deemed to have vested if a permit application was filed prior to the amendment's effective date, which was December 6th, 2024, and they have received a foundation or other permit based on a full zoning analysis within 1 year of the effective date, that is December 6th, 2025. The text further permits the application consistent with amendments to the application that are consistent with prior law up until the date the permit is issued. I want to conclude by commending the Department of City Planning, its director, and its dedicated professionals who drafted, presented, negotiated, and redrafted this text. As somebody who was on the sort of the small REBNY group that negotiated many of these for the industry, I can tell you that they did a really amazing job. Not that we agreed with them on everything, but it was remarkable in updating the zoning resolution and making it more user-friendly for housing development. I also want to credit the Real Estate Board and especially its Vice President for Planning, Basha Gerhard, and her assistant, Maddie DeCerbo, with leading the effort to make the text as housing-friendly and user-friendly as possible. We're looking forward to helping you and our other clients use this new text to realize their goals and ensuring that any technical issues that may arise, and I can tell you that based on what we've done so far, we know there will be many technical issues that will arise, will be dealt with smoothly and promptly. Thank you. And now Jim and Pat will tell you all about the uniform affordability preference and the related housing abatements.
Thanks. Do we, I guess I'll speak from here so they can, that little thing, yeah. Good morning. My name is Pat Sullivan. I'm going to talk about the affordable housing framework that is known as the Uniform Affordability Preference. So as Paul was talking about before, the general change, the most important change here is there is greater floor area and greater height that is now available for affordable housing buildings in all R6 through R10 zoning districts throughout the city. This map that was prepared by the Department of City Planning highlights those areas where the greater density is allowed. And in most cases, that's 20% more than would be allowed as of right. There are some exceptions like in R6 and R7 where there was either greater than 20% allowed or an increase in the base FAR, so there's an effective upzoning. And then in terms of the height, as Paul was saying, the old contextual regulations, that framework has generally been carried through with a height increase allowed for affordable buildings, though in many districts it's actually 10 feet or 20 feet more than had been allowed previously. There were these slides that the Department of City Planning created to illustrate those changes in the R6 and then in the R8B. And this slide is interesting because it shows the maximum new height as 105 feet. That was actually lowered to 95 feet through the city council. So the new program, the UAP, replaces the old voluntary programs, the R10 inclusionary and the inclusionary housing designated area programs, and I'll talk about the main changes. The mandatory programs, the mandatory inclusionary housing is not changed. Those existing MIH areas will remain, and MIH will continue to be mapped in new areas where there's a rezoning. But comparing the old programs that are now replaced by UAP, one important change is that there's lower income levels, lower AMIs. The old programs required a maximum of 80% of AMI. That's now come down to an average 60%, but a range is allowed up to 100% with a segment required at 40%. Secondly, there's a change in the bonus amount that's allowed. All of your additional floor area that's allowed under the UAP needs to be affordable, needs to be provided as affordable. So in some ways, that's a one-to-one bonus. And that's in contrast to the old programs. The R10 allowed a bonus of up to 3.5. The IHDA allowed 1.25. So those programs allowed an internal cross-subsidization that is not possible. So under the new program. So there'll be a need for the tax incentive or some other subsidy. And then as a general rule, your affordable housing needs to be provided on site on the same zoning lot. There's an exception to that for the R10 and the former IHDA areas that had been allowed to use an offsite bonus before. Those will still be allowed to have the affordable offsite through the purchase of inclusionary certificates. And these certificates for new buildings will create a bonus at the same one-to-one ratio that would be allowed if it were provided on site. The exception there is that if you're buying existing certificates or certificates generated by an affordable building that already has a recorded regulatory agreement, those can still bonus at the old ratios. So there's a big advantage to those existing certificates. And that will be true also for new affordable housing that had a building permit filed at the time the statute was enacted and that is completed within a certain time frame. And then the final point is that the affordable housing under UAP must be permanently affordable, which is true for MIH and was true under the old program. So Jim's going to talk more about UAP. There we go. There you go.
Thanks, Pat, and good morning, everybody. I'll be discussing how UAP works in conjunction with the 485X tax abatement program, and also discuss a couple of quirks in the program that in the UAP program that are not so apparent on initial review. So the 485X tax abatement program was adopted last spring by the state legislature as the replacement for 421A. It is available to rental residential projects that provide on-site affordable housing, either in the amount of 20% for buildings of 99 units or less, or 25% for buildings of 100 units or more. Here we see on the left, in an R10 zone, the UAP increase gets you from 10 to 12 FAR with a total of 2 FAR of affordable. That's the zoning requirement. However, that's the zoning UAP requirement. However, in a 12 FAR building, to achieve 20% affordable under 485X, you would be providing 2.4 FAR of affordable with 9.6 FAR of market rate. I don't have that graphic up, but you can see on the right, for a 25% 485X program, you have 3 FAR of affordable and 9 FAR of market rate. Next slide. Oh, I'm advancing the slides. Oh, sorry. In mid-density zones, the UAP increase in some cases is quite substantial. In an R72 district on a narrow street, the base FAR is 3.44. With UAP, you can go to 5.01. That's a total of 1.57 FAR in increase, 46%. And that's great for 100% affordable projects to have that 5.01 available. But in a mixed market and affordable project, there isn't actually much incentive to build out the full amount of UAP affordable because it's more affordable than would be required by 485X. As shown on the right here, the full 485X benefit is achieved with only 0.86 FAR affordable, which is 4.3 total FAR. So in many districts, there's actually a sweet spot where the market rate is maximized and the 485X benefit is achieved with less than the full amount of FAR allowed by UAP. Next, I'll go to what I refer to as the infill problem. So UAP was designed so that the final increment of floor area on the zoning lot is affordable. And it works as intended if the zoning lot is unimproved before construction begins. But if the zoning lot has floor area to remain, the UAP affordable increment could end up being substantially more than the 20% intended. Here we have on the left a zoning lot in an R10 zone with an existing 8 FAR building to remain. Under UAP, you'd be allowed to build an additional 4 FAR in a new building on the zoning lot or as an enlargement to get to 12 FAR. But that would have to include 2 FAR of affordable or 50%. So there would be little incentive to build out that 4 FAR building, except if you are a 100% affordable project. There would be little incentive to build out that 4 FAR building because the 485X benefit is achieved with just 0.5 of a FAR of affordable, as shown on the right. So the final 1.5 FAR that is available under UAP would not be utilized. This approach under UAP is in contrast to the way MIH works. Under MIH, the required affordable is taken as a percentage of your new development or enlargement, so that regardless of whether you have existing floor area to remain, you are incentivized to build out the full FAR permitted. So ironically, MIH is in some ways more in synergy with 485X than UAP is. Working with REBNY, we pointed out this problem in testimony at the City Planning Commission hearing on City of Yes. Unfortunately, our testimony did not result in a change in the zoning text. We are hopeful that City Planning will at some point see that potential housing is being left on the table on these types of sites and that they will change the way that UAP is implemented on these infill sites at some point in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sheila Pozon, a new partner here in the land use group at Kramer Levin, and I'll be giving you a high-level overview of the changes to the landmarks transfer provisions under City of Yes. And I'll be joined in the latter half of this segment by Valerie Campbell, also a partner here in our group. So, why? Why did City Planning decide that it was important to make these changes to the landmarks provisions in the zoning resolution? The simple answer is that the old program just wasn't working. There are over 1,400 individual landmarks in New York City, and over the past program, over 50 years, less than 15 took advantage of the old TDR program. I'm also proud to say that Kramer Levin, this group, did almost all of those. Toot our own horn here for a little bit. But yeah, 50 years, 15 sites. The reason for this is because the old program was just too onerous, too restrictive. The geographic restrictions, along with the ULURP process that came along with it, really disincentivized the use of the program. So under City of Yes, City Planning decided that the best way to try to achieve the goal of preserving these important landmarks and to incentivize housing was to streamline the process, make it more simple, expand that geographic area and, just make it a program that makes sense. Unfortunately, DCP's original proposal, which would have just been to create a non-discretionary process, was surprisingly, because of opposition from various preservation groups, cut back. And I'll walk through the 3 different types of programs that are now available. So first, expanded eligibility. This is a graphic from City Planning's website that shows you in the dark green the old transfer radius. So under the old zoning, you could only transfer from individual landmarks, not in historic districts. Had to be an individual landmark in a mid to high FAR district, and you could only go to your neighboring site or across the street or catty corner. You can see that in the dark green. Oops, sorry. I don't know what I just did. All right, I'll keep going. Sorry. So under the new program, they have switched from the old definition of adjacent lot, which is that dark green, to the much wider area and new defined term of surrounding area. And I'll just read you the definition. So the surrounding area means all zoning lots on the block on which the landmark building or other structure is located, as well as all zoning lots across a street or street intersection from the block. So that's what you see here with this lighter green. Let me see if I can just go back to, there we go. All right. I can also see that better now. So, but I want to focus on one of the terms that was mentioned in this updated definition. It says, as well as zoning lots across a street. So here, I'm going to show you in an overlay. You could actually do a zoning lot merger with those lots that are across the street and, and their surrounding blocks, so that it even further expands your potential receiving site. That's what's shown here in the orange. So this is really, this is truly an expanded geographic area. Turning to the simplified approval process, the old program was only through a special permit, which, as many of you know, is subject to a full ULURP process. Very time consuming. You never know what's going to happen as you go through that process. Opposition from the local community, maybe the council member. Very unpredictable. So City Planning said, how do we make this more predictable, more appeal, a better program to actually achieve those goals? And that's through this certification. So it's a joint application by both the granting site and the receiving site. It's a purely ministerial action, so you're not subject to ULURP. But what they did do to make sure that this isn't just unfettered is they did institute these transfer caps. So it's 20% of the basic maximum floor area for most receiving sites, and it goes up to 30% in certain areas, certain high-density zoning districts, above 15 FAR of residential. Also want to point out that the special Midtown district and the theater district have their own spin on this. So it's not, this is generally true, but there are other regulations in the other special districts. Similar to the old special permit, I do want to point out that you still have to get landmarks approval for a continuing maintenance program. So what does that mean? It means you have to do the work on your individual landmark to bring it up to sound first-class condition. And then secondly, you have to enter into a restrictive declaration, which is a legal instrument that would be recorded against the landmark property to make sure that that ongoing maintenance obligation is required and will run with the land, not just to this owner, but to subsequent owners. And finally, bulk modifications. So as a result of the concerns of the council and the way that it finally ended up playing out, we have 2 options. There's a CPC authorization, which is discretionary, meaning it's, you have to make certain findings. The City Planning Commission has to agree that your application meets those findings, but this is non-ULURP, typically referred to the community board, but you avoid that almost 2-year process that you would have to go through if you opt to go through the special permit. Why would you choose one over the other? Well, if you can do it by authorization, that's a faster process, less time, less money. This has to be made in conjunction with the certification for the transfer of the landmark TDRs, and it allows you to apply for bulk modifications other than floor area. And if your receiving site is in a zoning district that has a maximum building height, you can apply for up to 25% of the height increase. Why would you do the special permit? If you're in a district that has a maximum building height and you want more than 25% of height, or if you want to transfer more than 30% if you happen to be in an 15 FAR or higher district. So these are the changes. We think that these are good, right? It's a simpler process, lots of opportunity. But I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Valerie Campbell, who is, I think I can say this, the preeminent landmarks expert as a former general counsel of the commission. And she'll walk you through how this plays out on some real properties.
Just, yeah,
So you can use
just this. Okay. Good morning, Valerie Campbell. I'm a partner in the land use department. And can everyone hear me okay? Good. The expanded zone of receiving sites and the simplified process is certainly an improvement. However, an owner's ability to take advantage of these provisions will remain very dependent on the location of the landmark. It should also be noted that the distinction between an individual landmark and a contributing building in a historic district is not always a distinction of merit. It can be simply a function of timing. A contributing building in a historic district that is not individually designated can still only transfer its development rights through a zoning lot merger within the confines of its block. If a building is already included in the boundaries of a historic district, it usually will not be subsequently designated as an individual landmark. The only exception to this rule is when the commission goes back to designate cultural landmarks, such as the Stonewall Inn. Additionally, as Sheila mentioned, all landmark transfers will still require landmark's approval of a continuing maintenance plan. This plan typically has three components. First, the owner is required to do any restorative or repair work that is required to bring the landmark to a sound first-class condition. This is a standard that is interpreted as being more than just in a state of good repair. For instance, it might require the restoration or recreation of a significant architectural feature, such as a cornice or a decorative sculpture. Second, the owner must commit to a program of periodic inspections and repair to keep the landmark in a sound first-class condition. This obligation is set forth in a restrictive declaration that is recorded and binding on future owners in perpetuity. Landmarks approves continuing maintenance plans at a public hearing, and these plans are also referred to the local community board. Once a program is approved, the staff can approve any future transfers without a public hearing or referral to the community board, assuming the owner is in compliance with the recorded plan. Finally, the landmark owner must place at least 5% of the proceeds from the transfer in a segregated landmark account to help ensure that there will be funds available for any future work in the inspections. To illustrate the issues related to location, I've selected 3 churches of similar architectural quality and significance. Religious institutions are arguably burdened more than any other building types when they are designated or included in historic districts. Churches and synagogues are typically distinctive in terms of their massing and detailing, expensive to maintain, very purpose-built, and difficult to convert to other uses. In addition, many religious institutions also suffer from declining membership and have few financial resources other than their real property. In an ideal world, religious institutions and other landmarks would be able to offset the disadvantages of designation and the expenses of maintaining their landmark by selling their development rights. However, in practice, a landmark's ability to transfer development rights is highly dependent on its location. So this is a picture of Grace Church, which is an individual landmark located at 800 Broadway. It was one of the earliest landmarks designated in 1966. It is not located in a historic district, and it was always eligible to transfer development rights under this Section 7479 special permit. So this map shows the original receiving sites. The church and the landmark is in black. And so the original receiving sites are shown in dark green and the expanded receiving sites in light green. It's not clear if there are any feasible development sites in this zone. However, even if there are, it is also clear that there are a number of other individual landmarks, and you can see those outlined in sort of the fuchsia or the pink, that could also transfer to many of the same receiving sites. In this type of a situation, a better maintained or less complex landmark in terms of its architecture may be able to sell its development rights at a lower cost because the financial obligations associated with the continuing maintenance plan will be lower. The second example is the Church of St. Paul and St. Andrew, which is located at 263 West 86th Street. It was designated in 1981 as an individual landmark, but it was also included in the boundaries of the Riverside West and Historic District extension in 2012. So here you see the church, and here is a map that shows its receiving sites. Because it is located in a historic district, prior to the City of Yes changes, it could only transfer floor area through a zoning lot merger. It does have more opportunities for transfer now, which you can see in the same light green shading. But many of the potential receiving sites are actually contributing buildings in the historic district, or even in the case of the Belnord, which is located across the street from Broadway, another individual landmark. Here, the Landmarks Commission would have to approve any additions within the historic district. So it's unlikely that there would be a lot of ability to utilize development rights on contributing buildings within the district. And you also see, like Grace Church, there are other competing landmarks outlined in the fuchsia again that could transfer to some of the potential receiving sites. The third example is the Church of the Ascension, which is located at 3638 Fifth Avenue. It is not individually designated. It is a contributing building in the Greenwich Village Historic District, which was designated in 1969. So it can still only transfer through a zoning lot merger since it is not individually designated. And one of the consequences of the recent text changes is that I've had clients already ask me if landmarks can come back and designate a worthy building in a historic district as an individual landmark, so it would be eligible for the new transfer provisions. I suspect that Landmarks is going to resist this pressure because if once they do it, I think it'll be hard for them to say no to the next person. There was a certain logic in restricting transfers from buildings in historic districts because you can argue that all of the buildings within the district are similarly burdened. However, this logic was weakened a bit with the recent text changes. As a final point, I would note that the LPC's requirement of a continuing maintenance plans will influence a landmark owner's calculus of whether the proceeds from a transfer of development rights justifies the assumption of the continuing maintenance obligation. The proceeds from a development rights transfer under a certification or authorization where the increase in the receiving site FAR is limited to 20 or 30% may not generate enough revenue to fund the restoration work or justify the perpetual periodic inspection requirements of the continuing maintenance plan. Therefore, Landmarks is going to need to be more flexible in how this requirement is interpreted in situations where the revenue generated by the transfer is limited or where the restoration needs of the granting site are very costly. The good news is that Landmarks has shown this flexibility at East Midtown, where a broad receiving zone for Landmarks development rights was established. And I know that this is something the Commission is thinking about in light of the recent text changes. In short, the recent text changes will offer expanded opportunities to some landmarks if both the location and the economics are favorable. I'm now going to turn this over to Jean to discuss residential conversions. This little thing here. No, here.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to put it back to the.
Oh, you didn't.
Oh, here we go. Perfect. Okay, thanks, Val. Good morning. I'm Gene Travers, Special Counsel here in Kramer Levin's Land Use Group, and today I'm going to be discussing residential conversions. Whoops. So any good conversion opportunity will typically present you with three main factors to grapple with: the physical condition of the building, the rules that apply to the conversion, and whatever business and financial considerations might be at play. The physical limitations on conversions have been widely reported on, but just to recap, the ideal conversion model is a building with kind of a slender geometry, operable windows, and floor plates of a reasonable depth. It is possible to convert the larger post-war, boxy, bulky buildings. It just requires a little bit more creativity. The example here, 180 Water Street, the developer actually had to carve out the middle of the building to create a courtyard for light and air. The financial and other business considerations for conversions are going to be building specific and market dependent. But the one factor that we can control, and which City of Yes has directly addressed, are the regulatory constraints. And in doing so, the city has created a fantastic opportunity to repurpose underutilized buildings and to find new sources for housing. So just to set the table, the zoning resolution has had conversion regulations on the books since the early 1980s. That's when Article 1, Chapter 5 was adopted to allow conversions to access the more relaxed bulk and light and air standards under the state multiple dwelling law for conversions. Absent these special rules, most buildings would be unable to convert. However, until recently, Article 1, Chapter 5 was available only to buildings of a certain vintage and only buildings located in certain areas of the city. That's changed with City of Yes, which significantly expanded the reach of Article 1, Chapter 5, where the regulations previously applied to buildings constructed before 1961 or in Lower Manhattan 1977. The threshold has been fast forwarded to capture all buildings constructed before December 31st, 1990. And this 30-year jump captures an entirely new generation of buildings, many of which may have aged into obsolescence since the original regulations were adopted. And I do want to point out that there is a later cutoff date of December 10th, 1977, which is applicable in special mixed-use districts only. That date was not changed under City of Yes. Oops. The second major change for conversions under City of Yes was to expand Article 1, Chapter 5 citywide to all districts that allow residential use. As you can see from the map, Article 1, Chapter 5 was previously limited to the city's central business districts. It now has almost blanket applicability. The excluded areas on this map include manufacturing district, parkland, and airports, and that's really it. City of Yes included a number of other technical changes to help facilitate conversions. The prior framework allowed conversions only to residential dwelling units. Those are units that have kitchens and bathrooms. Under City of Yes, we can now convert to a wider range of housing types, including supportive housing, dormitories, and rooming units with shared bathrooms and kitchens. The outdated requirement for a special permit for conversions in the C6M and C6G districts has been eliminated. The prior requirement was an attempt to preserve certain legacy commercial and light industrial uses like garment manufacturing in Chinatown, for example. These uses have largely disappeared, and residential conversions are now allowed as of right in these districts. Rooftop open space requirements for conversions have been modernized. Previously, 30 to 50% of a building's rooftop to be converted had to be allocated for recreation space, and that was a real obstacle for many conversion projects. City of Yes replaced this with the recreation space requirement that now apply to all residential buildings, and importantly for conversions can be satisfied with indoor space. Finally, the elimination of parking requirements has created even more flexibility for adaptive reuse, and not listed here, but changes to the dwelling unit factor and the new floor area deductions that Paul mentioned during his presentation should hopefully allow for a much wider range of conversion projects
to pencil out. Of course, the state didn't want to miss out on the conversion party, and in 2024, its budget included a brand new tax exemption under Section 467M of the real property tax law. This incentive program offers a substantial reduction in property taxes for conversions that include affordable housing. And just a couple of highlights here, the program offers exemption periods of 35, 30, and 25 years, depending on when the project commences. As you can see, you'll need a building permit in hand by June of next year to unlock that longest benefit period of 35 years. So definitely get going. Qualifying projects will receive a 100% exemption for a construction period of up to 3 years. After that, a full 90% exemption is going to apply for the initial period for projects that are located called the Manhattan Prime Development Area, south of 96th Street, and a 65% exemption will apply elsewhere in the city. That exemption then steps down in the last 5 years of whatever period you've qualified for, whether it's 35, 30, or 25. To be eligible, your building has to have a certificate of occupancy for non-residential use for at least 90% of its floor area. I do want to point out that hotel conversions are excluded entirely from this incentive program, unfortunately. You have to be converting to at least 6 dwelling units, all of which are going to have to be residential, and make sure you complete construction and obtain a TCO by that December 31st, 2039 deadline. In terms of affordability requirements, the set asides 25% of the units at a weighted average of 80% of AMI, 5% of which must be at 40% AMI, and the units must be permanently affordable under this program. I also want to point out that there is a prevailing wage requirement for building service workers for conversion projects that include more than 30 units. So just be mindful of that. So overall, the expansion and streamlining of the conversion regulations have solved for a significant piece of the conversion puzzle, but there are some lingering obstacles to be aware of. First, as I mentioned, hotel conversions are excluded entirely from the 467M tax program, and they also cannot benefit from the expanded conversion regulations under City of Yes. Now, you can still convert hotels that were eligible for conversion prior to City of Yes. So these would be hotels constructed before 61 or 77 in Lower Manhattan and located in the more restricted geographic area. But any other hotels cannot be converted under the new regulations. Another major hurdle relates to post-1977 buildings that contain more than 12 FAR of floor area. The example here is 767 3rd Avenue. It was constructed in the 1980s. It's got a great floor plate for residential, but it was built to at least 18 FAR. And although the state lifted the 12 FAR cap for residential use last year, remaining limitations in the multiple dwelling law limit the conversion of post-77 buildings to 12 FAR of residential use as of right. So one solution in these cases is to undertake a rezoning to unlock a higher residential FAR for the conversion. Any rezoning is going to trigger mandatory inclusionary housing, however, so I think the approach would be to use the required affordable units to support your 467M tax exemption application. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeff Mulligan to discuss the city's Midtown South proposal, where rezoning will hopefully unlock even more conversion opportunities. Thank you.
Good morning. So city planning's proposal to change the zoning in, oops, there we go. In Midtown South would allow as of right residential development in most of the area for the first time since the adoption of the zoning resolution in 1961. The actions which entered ULURP last month include a zoning map amendment, zoning text amendment to create a special district, and to map mandatory inclusionary housing. The study area is divided into 4 sub-areas located roughly between 23rd and 40th Streets, 5th and 8th Avenues. The southeastern portion includes parts of the Madison Square North and Ladies Mile historic districts. This is another view of the 4 sub-areas. This map shows how the manufacturing zoning in the 4 sub-areas shown in purple is in stark contrast to the rest of this portion of Manhattan, which, as you can see, is either red or yellow, and those 2 colors allow residential, commercial, residential uses as of right. The zoning map amendment would rezone all M districts to period manufacturing and residential MX districts, which would allow a mix of residential, commercial, community facility, and light manufacturing uses. The new special district would also contain special bulk regulations and certain floor area incentives. The Garment Center Special District would be removed as part of the proposal. And as previously noted, the rezoning area will also be mapped MIH. The rezoning would also map for the first time the new R8 and R12 districts. These are new districts that allow more than 12 FAR in new residential developments for the first time. The M19 R12 district would be mapped in the two northern sub areas between 34th and 40th Streets, and a portion of the southwestern sub area that's shown in the darker blue in the slide. Permitted FARs would be 18 for residential and 15 for non-residential uses in this district. This bird's eye view shows the projected developments from City Planning's EIS, looking northeast from around 34th Street and 8th Avenue. Most of the projected developments are expected to be in the 300 to 350 foot range, with a couple above 400 feet. These are relatively modest heights, and they're due in part to the expectation that the developments will be rental versus condo because of the affordable housing requirements and tax incentives, as well as building-based requirements, which I'll discuss in a minute. This is a view looking southwest from approximately Bryant Park, with the new building shown in yellow. So all developments in the special district will require a minimum base height of 60 feet and a maximum base height of 155 feet. And that base height can go a little bit higher to match adjacent buildings. The existing zoning in Midtown South does not require a base, which has resulted in a number of new developments, such as hotels that are set back from the street and rise to considerable heights. A maximum 50% tower coverage would also apply in new developments above a height of 350 feet. The R8A, R12 district would be mapped in the southeastern sub area between 5th and 6th and 23rd and 31st, as well as a portion of the southwestern sub area. The permitted FARs here would be 18 for residential and 12 for non-residential uses. As noted, two historic districts are located within a portion of this sub area. The residential FAR for properties located within historic districts is limited to 12, pursuant to the MDL requirements adopted last year. And this is a view of the projected development sites looking northwest from about Madison Square Park. And finally, the southwestern sub area between 6th and 7th and 23rd and 29th will be mapped M18A R11. And here the FARs would be 15 for residential and 12 for non-residential uses. And then again, showing a bird's eye view of the projected developments in the southwestern sub area. And here the developments are expected to be generally less than 300 feet in height. The special district would also include incentives for public improvements, such as a floor area exemption, up to 150,000 square feet for a public school, a special permit for 20% floor area bonus for a covered pedestrian space, and an authorization for a bonus relating to transit improvements. Additional regulations would be removing the size restriction for large retail uses, reducing the minimum distance between buildings on a zoning lot to 8 feet to allow site plan flexibility, allow floor area to be freely distributed on a zoning lot containing an LPC designated historic landmark, and signage restriction, prohibition of illuminated signs on mid-blocks. City Planning projects that the rezoning will create up to approximately 9,700 new units, including approximately 2,900 affordable units. Now I'll turn it over to Adam Taubman, who's going to talk about the Long Island City Neighborhood Plan. So it's the ballot.
Thank you.
Good morning. Adam Taubman, Special Counsel in the Land Use Department here at Kramer Levin. The Long Island City Neighborhood Plan is unlike Midtown South in that it hasn't yet commenced formal public review. This means that we don't have all the details of the proposal that will eventually be released to the public. But Kramer Levin has been closely involved in the city's planning process through our clients, some of whom have significant investments in and long-standing ties to the neighborhood. So we have a fairly clear idea of where things are heading. The proposal is a significant part of the administration's strategy to increase housing supply through neighborhood rezonings as a supplement to City of Yes. City planning has projected that the rezoning will result in almost 14,000 new residential units in the neighborhood. But this is also a rezoning that has its roots in pre-City of Planning efforts, City of Yes planning efforts for Long Island City. Like those earlier efforts, the new planning approach recognizes Long Island City's distinct mixed-use character, its proximity to Midtown Manhattan and public transportation, and its unique waterfront. This graphic, which was taken from the Long Island City Neighborhood Plan website, shows what Long Island City looks like today. The boundary of the proposed rezoning area is shown in the dashed red line. And you can see that the rezoning area is generally situated between Long Island City's Central Business District to the east, Hunters Point to the south, Dutch Kills and the Queensbridge houses to the north, and of course the waterfront to the west. The areas shown in purple are zoned for manufacturing today and contain light industrial and commercial uses. Occupying a big chunk of that sea of purple in a diagonal hatch are two industrial business zones, or IBZs. The IBZ designation means that the areas benefit from a few different city policies that are intended to support the industrial sector, including, as of today, a commitment not to rezone these areas for residential use. At the perimeter of the rezoning area, in yellow and light orange, are smaller pockets of residential and mixed-use development with corresponding zoning districts. The question for city planning and other stakeholders has been how to transition from these conditions to a higher density neighborhood that knits together the surrounding areas, without sacrificing Long Island City's distinct character and without creating or exacerbating the types of planning issues that often come with population growth. To their credit, neither city planning nor the local council member, Julie Wan, claimed to have answers to that question at the outset. In November of 2023, they launched a community engagement process to solicit input on the neighborhood plan. That process has to date included 8 focus area meetings, 3 town halls, and 2 other public meetings, representing a very robust and considered approach to public outreach. In parallel with that effort, city planning has been undertaking environmental review of the proposal, issuing a draft scope of work in July 2024. So this is a graphic showing the basic planning strategies that the city defined coming out of the initial stages of that public engagement process and heading into issuance of the draft scope. I should note again that this image, all images in the presentation, are taken from the Long Island City Neighborhood Plan website. For the IBZ in the middle of the rezoning area, there's no proposed residential use, of course, but instead a goal of rezoning to facilitate business growth. The areas that have been identified as suitable for higher density residential and mixed-use developments include 2 areas adjacent to Court Square and the Queensbridge houses, which are referred to here as mixed-use town centers. Those are numbers 1 and 2. The commercial corridors of 40th Avenue, 44th Drive, and Vernon Boulevard, which is shown here, extend to or come very close to the waterfront. Those are numbers 3, 4, and 5. And other areas that benefit from close proximity to public transportation. Those are the green areas, number 7, 6, 7, and 8. And this is the draft zoning framework for the area that came out more recently from the city. You can see again that the IBZ occupying that central upland portion of the rezoning area would be mapped in new manufacturing zones. But in the town centers and the key corridors and waterfront area that were just up on the previous screen, the city is proposing mixed-use pairings of manufacturing and residential districts. The paired districts generally allow a very broad range of residential, commercial, and manufacturing uses. And it's not immediately clear from this image, but these districts will also be mapped in an extension of the existing special Long Island City District. That treatment will allow city planning to create special zoning text to advance the city's planning goals for the neighborhood. The zoning districts in coloring here also represent the city's vision for density. The highest density districts would be mapped in locations near Court Square and the Queensbridge houses. The proposed districts here are proposed to allow up to 12 FAR of residential use under the MIH program. Along Annabelle Basin and other parts of the waterfront shown in lighter pink, the city is looking at R8 and R9 residential district components, which could allow between 7.2 and 8 FAR of residential use under MIH. And then the areas in orange and yellow representing the commercial corridors and transition areas around the proposal's highest density pockets would allow residential and other uses at medium densities. Another interesting feature of this framework is that most of the proposed manufacturing districts, including in those paired M and R district pairings, utilize an A suffix, which is a recent creation under City of Yes for economic opportunity. These districts are subject to a broader range of maximum FARs than standard M zones, which will allow the city to more closely tailor its rezoning proposal to its vision for the neighborhood. And the A suffix also benefits from the updated bulk regulations that allow larger, more flexible zoning envelopes. Another key feature of the proposed rezoning framework is an overhaul of the waterfront access plan that currently governs the waterfront in this area. With this designation, city planning will be able to fine-tune the zoning resolution's waterfront regulations to generate public open spaces at specific locations and at desired scales. One thing that we know from Kramer-Levin's involvement in the process is that Annabelle Basin, shown at the southern end of the waterfront access plan, is being viewed as an opportunity to create some very meaningful open space for the neighborhood with some unique site-specific design features. The neighborhood plan, of course, involves more than just zoning changes. We know that it will be critical for the city to make significant investments in infrastructure and resiliency measures, since even today, the neighborhood is vulnerable to flood events and to inadequate sewer and stormwater management systems. Community members have fairly consistently voiced a desire for more parks and public open spaces in the neighborhood, as well as other community amenities. And last, the rezoning area includes a few city-owned sites, which officials have indicated could potentially be repurposed for new use or development. EDC recently announced that it will issue a request for expressions of interest for one of these sites, which is located on the west side of Vernon Boulevard and occupied by DOE today. Community advocates have already expressed high levels of interest in what happens with these city-owned sites. Officials have said that the ULURP application for the neighborhood plan will be certified for formal public review in spring of this year, and will of course continue to follow that proposal closely. With that, I will hand things over to my colleague, Jessica Christie. The mouse wheel.
Good morning. My name is Jessica Christie, and I'm an associate in Kramer-Levin's Land Use Department. Following the previous discussions of anticipated rezonings, I'm going to be looking a little bit farther into the future to say what we know at this time about the Manhattan Plan, which the mayor first previewed in his State of the City address on January 9th. In particular, I'll be focusing on the proposal to map new R11 and R12 districts elsewhere in the city. The hallmark of the Manhattan Plan will have the ambitious goal of adding 100,000 new homes to Manhattan over the next decade to surpass the 1 million residences mark in the borough. Very few details have been released at this time about how this goal will be achieved. This really is just a preview for now, but at the moment, it looks like the plan is going to have two main prongs. The first prong will be for the city to identify city-owned sites for multifamily residential redevelopment. So far, the city has only named 100 Gold Street, which is currently the home of HPD and other city offices. The mayor has stated that redeveloping Gold Street will lead to the creation of more than 2,000 mixed-income units. On a similar note, EDC recently released an RFP for the redevelopment of Gansevoort Square. The RFP contemplates that the site will be rezoned to allow up to 600 different units and says that 50% of those units should be affordable. We don't yet know if Gansevoort Square will be formally included in the Manhattan Plan, but the RFP certainly is in keeping with this first prong. The second prong will be to use new tools created by City of Yes for Housing Opportunity to incentivize and facilitate the creation of more housing. The primary tool that the city has identified at this time is to map new R11 and R12 districts, which, as we've already discussed, would permit greater than 12 residential FAR subject to MIH. The city has said that it considers the Midtown South proposal to be part of the Manhattan Plan, but it has yet to identify which other areas might be under consideration for these new highest density districts. In fact, city planning really hasn't given any hints at all about where new R11 and R12 districts might be appropriate outside of Midtown South. But that doesn't mean that we don't have any inkling about where such districts might be proposed. Helpfully, the Manhattan Borough President has already identified some areas where residential FARs above 12 might be appropriate for consideration. In 2023, the Borough President issued this report titled Housing Manhattanites. The report identifies potential development sites and proposes certain upzonings that could collectively generate over 73,000 new residences across the borough. Because this report was issued in 2023, before the 2024 amendments to the MDL and the zoning resolution had passed, which now allow greater than 12 residential FAR to be mapped and built in the city, this report doesn't contemplate or doesn't explicitly recommend places that these districts should be located. But nevertheless, there are a number of areas where the report explicitly states that an area identified for a potential R10 upzoning might be appropriate for above 12 FAR residential if such densities were to be legalized, which of course they now have been. One such area identified in the report encompasses the northern two areas of what is now the Midtown South proposal. The borough president said that if the 12 FAR cap were lifted, these highlighted areas could be suitable for higher residential densities. And as we all know, city planning is now working on a proposal that is consistent with that recommendation. So that could be a sign that the other areas identified in the report that are similarly identified in the report for R10 upzonings and that are flagged for above 12 FAR if legalized, that they really could be places to watch for proposed R11 and R12 districts. So I'm now briefly going to run through the other areas in the report that are identified as being potentially suitable for above 12 residential FAR. And I'll note a couple of other mechanisms that could accompany such upzonings in certain special districts. So the first such area is a proposed rezoning of the special West Chelsea district. The report contemplates rezoning a number of manufacturing districts along the West Side Highway between West 15th and 30th Streets as C46 and C64 districts, both of which have a residential equivalent of R10. However, the report notes that these areas could be appropriate for higher residential FARs if permitted by the state. It is noteworthy that, like Midtown South, these areas are currently manufacturing districts. In fact, all but one of the areas that are similarly identified in the report are currently manufacturing districts or C8 districts where no new residential uses are permitted. Of course, this doesn't mean that R11 or R12 districts would be inappropriate in existing high-density residential districts, but the borough president's report simply didn't address that possibility because it wasn't allowed at the time. Moreover, the manufacturing districts targeting for upzoning are of particular interest because they would represent the highest incremental benefit by going from completely barring new residential uses to allowing potentially the very highest density residential districts. So with that, some more manufacturing districts. The report identifies certain manufacturing districts along the West Side Highway between West 28th and 56th Streets and proposes, first, designating them as receiving sites within the special Hudson River Park District, and second, rezoning them as C64 districts with an R10 equivalent. A word of explanation about receiving sites. The special Hudson River Park District created a mechanism for transferring floor area from designated granting sites, which are largely located on piers, to designated receiving sites within the special district. As such, the designation of these orange areas as receiving sites would allow them to incorporate unused floor area from a designated granting site. And again, the report notes that these areas could be suited for above 12 FAR. Next is a potential rezoning and text amendment within the Special Clinton District. The primary component of this proposal would be to map a new medium-density mixed-use district between 11th and 12th Avenues, shown in the yellow-orange color. But the report also proposes rezoning the manufacturing districts to the north, shown in the darker orange, as either R10 or C64 districts. And once again, the report notes that higher residential FARs could be appropriate in these areas. Next, jumping up to the East 90s near FDR Drive. The report identifies a pair of C84 districts for a potential R90 or R10 rezoning. And it's noteworthy that even though the report doesn't fully commit to saying that R10 is the correct option here, it still notes that above 12 FAR residential could be possible in these areas. And then last but not least is areas of the Special Hudson Yards District. At the moment, zoning lots in certain areas and sub-areas of Hudson Yards are required to provide a certain amount of commercial FAR before any residential FAR may be built. The report proposes a text amendment that would eliminate this requirement in sub-areas A4 and A5, and in parts of sub-areas A3. The text amendment would also increase the maximum permitted residential FAR from 6 to 12 in these areas. So the report's proposal would significantly increase the amount of residential FAR available in these areas and would make it easier for such FAR to be built. And once again, the report notes that its 12 FAR proposal is based on then existing state law and that higher residential densities could be appropriate here. So that's it from me. We will obviously be keeping a very close eye on the Manhattan Plan and on these areas, and we hope to have more good news to share with you all soon. And with that, I will turn things over to my colleague, Tony Finger.
Good morning. I'm Tony Finger, Environmental Special Counsel at Kramer Levin, and I'm going to talk today about the Green Fast Track Rule for Housing that went into effect in June of 2024. The goal of that rule was to streamline the environmental review process for small and medium-sized residential projects in New York City to get much-needed housing online more quickly. So the rule created a new Type 2 action under New York City's Environmental Quality Review, or SEQR. Type 2 actions are actions that are not subject to environmental review. The State Environmental Quality Review Act and the City SEQR each have a list of Type 2 actions. This rule amended only the city's Type 2 list to include two types of residential developments. The first are actions that result in the development of at least one and no more than 250 incremental dwelling units that meet certain density requirements for non-residential use and are located wholly within an existing R5 through R10 residence district, or are located in existing standalone commercial or manufacturing districts where the residential is being developed pursuant to a regulatory agreement or a lease with a government agency or by BSA approval. The other are actions that result in the development of at least one and no more than 175 incremental units that also meet certain density requirements for non-residential use and are located at least partially within an R1 through R4 district. In both cases, the actions cannot enlarge or create a special mixed-use zoning district or a standalone commercial district. So when we are thinking about whether a project meets these density requirements, we don't only consider the development site, but we also have to look at other developable sites that may be affected by the proposed actions. So this new Type 2 category acts differently than most others. Typically, if an action falls within a Type 2 description, for example, it meets the type and density, SEQR doesn't apply and nothing else needs to be done except that the agency may document why it's a Type 2. But under this new rule, not only does the development have to meet the density and zoning requirements that I just discussed, there's a number of prerequisites that also have to be met. Many of these involve preparing technical analyses or engaging with city agencies. So what are the prerequisites? They're listed here, and all of them have to be met. The development has to commit to all electric heating. If an applicant is not going to consent upfront to an E designation for hazardous materials, they're going to have to prepare a phase 1 environmental site assessment, and if necessary, do phase 2 sampling and prepare a remedial action plan. The Landmarks Commission has to determine that there would be no impacts to historic resources and no archaeological concerns, and this may require doing an archaeological study. And if there will be a historic resource within 90 feet of the development site, the applicant has to prepare a construction protection plan. The applicant also has to demonstrate that the project will not be near certain emission sources and that emissions limits at the site won't exceed city or state guidelines. And they also have to demonstrate that the ambient noise levels at the site do not exceed prescribed limits, or else they're going to have to agree to an E designation for noise attenuation. Construction of the project cannot be more than 24 months. And there's also restrictions on where the development can be located. It cannot be located in a special coastal risk district next to an arterial highway or a tunnel vent structure. The site cannot contain a natural resource. And lastly, the buildings cannot exceed certain maximum building heights. City Planning has created an online tool to help applicants through the eligibility determination, but applicants are still going to need to engage consultants to help them conduct these required analyses. Applicants intending to go through the fast track should advise agencies as early as possible in the process. For those projects where City Planning is the lead agency, applicants still have to meet certain pre-certification milestones, including getting approval of a reasonable worst-case development scenario, which can take up to 60 days or so. As shown on this diagram, eligibility for Green Fast Track can't be determined until City Planning has approved that reasonable worst case. But once they do, the eligibility package can be formally submitted, and then engagement with outside agencies can begin. Once eligibility is confirmed, City Planning will generate a Type 2 memo indicating that all of the criteria that I discussed previously have been met. So while this does still involve a process, the fast track is meant to significantly reduce approval time, make it more predictable, and reduce consulting costs. So how is this actually played out? Well, City Planning doesn't yet have those statistics, but they will hold an applicant forum in March, and they may provide some more information then. But I suspect that the full picture isn't going to be known for some time since the rule came into effect less than a year ago. Also, I've been advised that a number of the applications that are about to get fast track approval at the beginning of this year, many of them were EASs that switched to the fast track midstream once the rule became effective. So those are not truly indicative of the timing. Also, because the rule was approved in the summertime, some of the applications got stuck in that summer blackout period when noise monitoring is not allowed to occur, and others were on pause waiting for the City of Yes for Housing opportunity to be passed. Also, some of the initial applications that were submitted moved a little bit more slowly as there was some learning curve as to what was required for some of the technical analyses. But ultimately, if it takes 4 to 6 months to get through the reasonable worst case and the eligibility determination, it is still considerably shorter than the time it takes to get through an EAS, which can take 1 to 2 years depending on the complexity of the project. And also the cost is significantly less than preparing an EAS. Lastly, I just want to mention that the state is following suit as there is a proposal to update the state's Type 2 list to exempt certain housing developments, including those up to 10,000 gross square feet that contain at least 4 units. So hopefully these rule changes on both the state and city level will result in housing to come online more quickly. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan and Andy.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning.
Dan Berman and Andy Charles in the Real Estate Transactions Group, which just means we were not smart enough to be land use attorneys.
So I guess we're the finale before the Q&A. So I think the takeaway that we'd like to start with is that this presentation we found very informative, and it talked about, in many cases, the future of New York City. And between the City of Yes and the changes that are being done to accommodate additional housing, I think the death of New York City that was talked about and as a major place to live and work after COVID was greatly exaggerated. And I think from a transaction standpoint, which is what Dan and I do, I think the facts bear that out. I guess we can talk first about the leasing market in New York City today.
Sure.
And what we're seeing. In general, you should know that the death of the office building was also pretty much premature. I'm sure you've read the articles and you've seen the buildings at 1 Vanderbilt, 50 Hudson Yards, 55 Hudson Yards. These are office buildings that are incredibly expensive and practically 100% occupied.
It's like a differentiation between the trophy assets in the city and everything else. And it has only gotten exacerbated in terms of demand, supply, and values at this point.
Yeah, because first of all, the trophy has now exceeded Class A. And what we're seeing is a rush to just better office space to accommodate the sort of changing work environment that landlords are seeing from the demands that their tenants are making. I mean, you've seen it in terms of the amenities that office buildings are offering today are similar to what you would normally see in a residential complex, right? And that is because the office is being reimagined less so as just a place to go to work, as more of a holistic environment for how you spend the bulk of your day. That's what young people are desiring. And young people are moving to New York, and the workforce is responding in kind. And as a corollary to that, what's happening is that the old Class A is now improving their buildings to the extent that there's capital to do that, to be able to attract the tenants that may otherwise not be able to afford the trophy. And because the trophy is such a limited supply at this time, the new office buildings that are designed to basically replicate that are not scheduled to really come in line until probably, I think the earliest is 2032.
And just to kind of touch on the capitalization of these office buildings, a lot of them have capital structures that they just can't support right now due to the interest rates and the inability to refinance. So office is unique in that it's capital intensive all along the way. When there's new turnover of a new tenant, there's a lot of cost that needs to go into that. And part of the distress that was, confronting the whole city was the lack of funds available in order to refinance these properties. So what we're seeing now is an increase in these recaps that are happening within the capital structure. It may be in a Class A building that needs some more TI, leasing commission availability, and existing lenders aren't willing to give it. So new lenders might be coming in within the stack, which is getting much more complex. There's not as much common equity available at all, but you'll have sort of B-note lenders coming in for slices of the capital stack to inject new capital into a project that might be a good building, but just capitally impaired, in order to sort of regenerate that and keep it viable.
Yeah, and as a result, I think you're seeing buildings being sold. Yes, a number of them are being sold at a discount, but at least transactions are happening. Transactions are up 21% this year in 2024 compared to where they were in 2023. I think there is a general consensus in the market, and I think we're seeing it bear out, that we've kind of hit bottom. The values have already been sort of reset. Recapitalizations are taking place. Sales are taking place, yes, to some degree at a very big discount, but they're transacting.
And as a result of that, those new owners who are now buying at a significant discount will have the capabilities to infuse new capital into these buildings to bring them up to a different level than where they were before. Similarly, I think also what we've seen in 2024 and we expect to see continued in 2025 is the continued expansion of those capital providers that are out there for these kinds of deals, especially the opportunistic deals. For example, 10 years ago was primarily office buildings were primarily capitalized by the traditional institutional lenders. Today, we see private equity funds investing in office buildings. We see family office that have been sort of shut out from those types of investments because their capital was not generally as large, obviously, as the big institutions. But you have all these different players taking a position in an area that was formerly, sort of rather limited. And as a result, we're seeing more activity than we've seen in the last 2.5 years.
And financing generally really opened up in the second half of last year. There were a lot of transactions just, in all asset classes because lenders were lending again and the CMBS markets opened up. And I think we expect that to continue, although I think we ended up ending 2024 feeling like there was some stability in the market and we sort of knew where things were headed. But I think that sort of transition towards the end of 2024 when we started to think maybe there weren't going to be as many rate cuts. And I think we are in a little bit of a unpredictable moment right now where tariffs are being, announced and the impact on construction costs and how that affects inflation. So while there was a lot of transaction velocity and we continue to see it, I think there are sort of different currents going on that it's hard to predict really how much things will pick up based on these other factors.
Yeah, for sure. Although I will say, at least in some of the clients that I have, especially the international ones, money can't just sit there and funds do not want to return money to their investors. So what happens is, and I think what is happening and what will continue to happen this year is notwithstanding the euphoria over the idea last year that there were going to be all these rate cuts and things were going to return to sort of pre-pandemic levels, is that the expectation and the underwriting of certain deals are changing as to what's an acceptable investment as opposed to what's not.
I think in the city also there's sort of these currents of there is increased employment, but I think a lot of that is in lower income, the addition of jobs. And so I think there is this sort of tension of there isn't a lot of housing available. The prices have gone up. Yeah, employment has gone up, but it's not necessarily the employment that's affording the housing that's in the city, or at least in the more expensive parts of the city. So I think it actually creates additional pressure. And these programs that have come out are great. But 485X, for example, actually incentivizes sort of smaller developments under 100 units because of the costs that go along with the program for exceeding that. So I think there are challenges that are going to have to be worked through in terms of housing, and I'm not sure that office to resi conversions are going to absorb, all of it. They'll make a difference, but yet to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, especially that's where. With respect to housing, that's where sort of the outer boroughs come in. I think if you take a look at the large scale multifamily projects that are currently in the pipeline being constructed and scheduled to come into market, in the next 2 to 3 years, most of that is taking place outside of New York City, in Brooklyn, Queens, and not in New York City. But the fact remains, as a result of the continued growth and the expected growth, as evidenced by what the city is doing and all the changes that are taking place to be able to accommodate people that have and will continue to move into New York City, is that this is an issue that has to be addressed. And I don't know about you, but I think in the last 3 to 6 months, I know in New York City, there's been a tremendous amount of high-end, I'm not talking about like the real 100% affordable, but sort of the an affordable component coupled with the market component. There's been a lot of development over the last year and in the pipeline for those kind of units for multifamily rental. And what I've noticed from clients that have been doing or looking at deals in the last 3 to 6 months, there seems to be a shift now to go back to condo development that has been sort of dormant for the last couple of years in terms. Don't forget, anything that you're seeing now that's been constructed was already in the pipeline in 2020. It was already in some way conceived and being processed. Now, so nothing was really happening in 22, 23, and 21 in terms of really new condo development at the rate that we saw previously. Now, I think there's been a sort of turn to that again, at least in what we're seeing as potential projects coming down in the market.
Yeah, and I think part of that is the financing's back. I think generally, just to sort of sum up across asset classes, the more we get to price discovery, and maybe it's already kind of getting there with office, but the more we get to price discovery, the more people can be comfortable investing. And the hope is that eventually the common equity is going to come back into the market, which will make a big difference in creating more opportunities. I think, yeah, should we leave it at that? And we'll let Elise do the Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks so much to our very smart real estate colleagues who we love to work with. We really appreciate you being part of this presentation. And if all the land use people can come up toward the front so we can so you can answer questions. Riley, I think you have a handheld mic. Is that correct? So does anybody after all of that have any questions or are you overwhelmed with information? Let's see, Woody in the back.
Thanks very much. This was fabulously informative. One of the questions that strikes me is when we see the introduction of residential into manufacturing zones, I'm curious as to how it is that it's a joint zone which continues to allow manufacturing if it's being changed to residential, since traditionally those two uses have not been common bedfellows.
Okay, Jean, are you here someplace?
I'm here.
Okay, come on up.
I don't know if that was specific to conversions, but you know, special mixed use districts have existed for quite some time, and I think the city has now had a realization that they can be further encouraged. I mean, the supplementary use regulation changes under City of Yes now allows different uses to be located above one another. This is something that I think as a policy matter, the city thinks they can manage through zoning and probably should be encouraged. So I think we're moving away from kind of that traditional Euclidean zoning, if that answers your question. But I agree, it does seem different.
And yeah, I mean, and this exists throughout the city already in mixed use zones like Long Island City and so on. There are special regulations that deal with not having manufacturing uses next to residential uses, but where residential is permitted, the residential FARs that we've been talking about control. And that's also, so that's going to be in Midtown South and also Long Island City. Another question? Did you have a question in the front?
So about the landmarks and transfer of FAR, do you still have to have a chain or can you jump to different buildings on the block?
Sheila or Valerie?
So under the new regulations, you're going from that old transfer radius, which was the defined term adjacent lot, to now this expanded radius, meaning surrounding area. So you can go, and actually, let me see if I can pull up that map, because I think that's going to be the most helpful. So you don't have to do a chain. What you can do now is, if this is your individual landmark, again, it has to be an individual landmark, not just a contributing building in a historic district. You can you can transfer by that new certification process to anywhere on this block. You don't have to do a zoning lot merger. Across the street on this block, here in the light green or the dark green, across the way this way. So you don't have to create that chain. What is interesting though is in that definition of surrounding area, in districts that have an FAR, residential districts above 15 FAR, it does still allow you to do that chain if you want to continue even beyond these blocks. But the areas where that's really available, I think, you have to do that analysis that Val went through. Where are your potential receiving sites? Does it really, is there going to be a place where it can absorb that additional floor area from those TDRs if you happen to be within a historic district, or, you just have to do that type of analysis.
You mentioned a cap of transferring air rights of I think it was 25 or 35%.
Yeah, so it depends on where on your receiving site. The cap is, here's the transfer cap. It's calculated based on the basic maximum floor area for the receiving site. So it's 20% again for most areas, but if your receiving site happens to be in a high density district, then you can go up to 30%. And in addition, if you want to go through that ULERT process, you can go above that for.
So a landmark site looking to monetize their air rights, there's no limitation on them transferring. It's really about the receiving site.
Well, it also depends on how much unused floor area your landmark site has, right? It's not just unlimited.
Of course, but yeah, but the only limitation is driven by the receiving site, correct?
The cap is driven by the
Yes.
receiving site, yes.
Okay, great, thanks.
Maxed out on its use of FAR, but there's an eligible receiving site for a landmark with excess development rights. Sorry. It can receive 25% of the excess of its own floor area as of right, or it still needs to go through discretionary process to exceed its own $10.
It depends. Yes, it depends. I'm also. Yeah, Paul, I'll let you take that.
So there are certain times in which you can hear, as it were. That's a somewhat new concept that's evolved over the past couple of years. And where you have a UAP project where the maximum residential FAR is, say, 12, there is no basic maximum anymore. There is a maximum with no UAP, and there's a maximum with UAP. You can tier landmark development rights on top of that to get to 14.4. Now, if you're in a 12 FAR residential district, you'll have to use the other 2.4 for commercial or community facility uses, but you'll be able to do that. You can do the same with the subway bonus. So there are certain situations in which you're able to exceed the underlying FAR limitations. I also say one other thing, Sheila, and that is that the 15 FAR zones are any 15 FAR zone, whether it's commercial or residential. So in the CBD right now, you can do the 30%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to chime in, one other point, there is the possibility of increasing the lot area of the receiving site by zoning lot merger, thereby increasing your 30% gets that much higher based on a larger lot area. So
yeah, so it's maybe just kind of taking a huge step back. Whenever you're looking at any of these types of regulations, remember, it's not just about your individual tax lot or building, it's about your zoning lot. So you have to do those types of calculations based on the entirety of the zoning lot. So for your receiving site, it's a receiving site, but it's your receiving site zoning lot. Right? So so what, I think this is a good slide to show that. So if you expand the size of, so say you wanted to land here or here, you could do a zoning lot merger to include all three of these tax lots, and your receiving site calculation would be based on the receiving site zoning lot. Yeah, you have to take into account the existing floor area on your receiving site zoning lot. It's not just you always have to take into account the existing to remain. Jordan?
Question. On this map, you're showing the expanded area going along the street front. Is there an opportunity in mid-block with this expanded definition? Like, could the orange lots happen on the off the rear lots of an across the street parcel?
You're talking about like here or?
There or the block directly above
Yeah,
there.
you know, in theory you could, but the reason I didn't color it in is because I just don't think that's likely to be a good receiving site. You know, typically your mid blocks have a lower FAR than along the avenues. So, yeah, you could, you could if you wanted to, do a massive zoning lot merger, try to pick up the entirety of the block and make your way all the way to the other side, but. No, I mean, if the zoning lot, but only with the zoning lot merger. You can't just go from here to the other side, yeah. Yeah, so you could use, several of the zoning tools that are available to further extend or expand the receiving site area.
I had one other question while I have the mic here. As an architecture practice that very commonly did hotel developments and nothing since the de Blasio administration, is there any, and I know it's noticeably absent, like any kind of reference to that in the city of Yes, is there any movement or anything that Kramer Levin knows about towards making hotel as of right again?
No, unfortunately, no. I mean, personally, I don't, and I think many others in the audience would agree, there doesn't seem to be a planning rationale for this kind of retrenchment on hotel in the city. But unfortunately, as you said, during the de Blasio administration, first they started, in the M districts, and then it became everywhere. Just hotels are no longer permitted as of right.
Is there organizations or folks that we can get behind to, I mean, I guess maybe this is an off the line question, but there has to be some sort of effort being made to bring this back, because as I look at Midtown South rezoning, right, we have all of this for rent product that's going to be popping up there, and there's going to be absolutely no hotel development, right? And so from a mixed use perspective, it's going to be a very one-sided district. So I don't know. I basically would love for folks in this room to figure out how to organize, to figure out how to push back on this.
Yeah,
But the hotel development's really, really, really difficult. We're gonna have a
Yeah, I
big
mean,
supply problem.
I think the city's position is that it's still available under that very onerous special permit, and for you. Yes. It's linked, yeah. Yeah, if you can, if you can, yeah.
Findings are very simple.
Yeah, the findings are simple. It's just that the time that it takes is, yeah. And the union requirements, the unstated union requirements.
I have a question about spot rezonings. Would city planning require affordable housing for almost any spot rezoning, or it would really depend on what the rezoning was?
I'm gonna let someone else take that, but we don't use the term spot rezonings for our applications because, yeah.
regardless of the size of the subject.
I don't know if Tony is still here, but is the green fast track, that's only for existing residential zones? It's not, if it's not a conversion of commercial or industrial zones that might be adjacent to residential zones?
Well, Tony's not here. I believe the intent is to exempt certain types of projects from environmental review requirements. So inherently, these are projects that are going through a discretionary land use process. If you met the criteria of the green building fast track, then in theory you would be exempt actually from environmental review for that project, even rezoning, as far as I'm aware.
And Valerie, sorry, I have a lot of questions. For the landmarks transfer, when it was 25% and you had to go through the city planning authorization, is that going to be a similar process to what we went through for the Flatiron building, where you're doing environmental review and you need the community board of
So it's no city council review, so that's helpful, but it will take about the same amount of time as authorizations take today.
Thank you. Since you happen to have the slide up already, is there a standard criteria when you're applying now for a special permit, which would qualify you to go beyond the stated increases?
Well, you would have to meet the findings for the special permit. And those, actually, I don't have the text in front of me. Val, are you?
If you're asking for bulk modification, you're not supposed to have an adverse impact on other conforming buildings in the area. The special permit has also been used for use modifications. One thing to note is that one of the reasons the 7479 hasn't been used that often in the past is because if you can merge your zoning lots, you can use 74,711. And although that was still a special permit process, it wasn't, the cap wasn't applicable to 74,711s. So city planning has been, I think, in general, very receptive to 74,711s and also 74,779s. The most recent 7479 I worked on actually got withdrawn after city planning approval because the local council member was opposed to it. So.
And just another thing to note about these landmark TDRs, just because you're a landmark doesn't mean you have to go through one of these processes. You could always just do a standard zoning lot merger if your receiving site happens to satisfy the contiguity requirements. The zoning lot for your receiving site satisfies the contiguity requirements, and that's an as of right process. So then you don't have to go through, any sort of approval process with city planning. That would just be done under the, the existing zoning.
Okay, we'll take one last question. Woody again. There you go.
So for a landmark transferring density, the fund that has to be established for the perpetuation and maintenance of the landmark, if you're selling a small amount of density where the dollars may be meaningful to the landmark owner, but in the context of the overall size of the landmark, it's hard to take a percentage of that 5% to be able to actually sustain the landmark. So how does that math work? If that question was said clearly enough to follow it.
I'll let Val answer that because I think that's what she was getting at with, a few of her examples.
Well, we've seen this in East Midtown, where you have the designated landmarks that can transfer to an expanded area. And what Landmarks has done is recognizing that the transfers may not generate enough funds to bring the landmark up to a sound first class condition. They've required that first 75% of the proceeds go to landmark work. And then, so for some owners, there may not be that much of an incentive to actually sell if the vast majority of their proceeds are going to have to be plowed back into a building that may require a lot of work. In East Midtown, it works because although, you know, a landmark like St. Barb's has a lot of work that needs to be done, the value of its development rights and the upcoming transfers is sufficient to fund that work over time. But they have been fairly consistent about the 5% because basically after a couple of the first initial transfers, the landmarks 10 years later would come back to the Landmarks Commission. They had a preservation fund and they would ask for money to maintain their building, and landmarks would be like, well, wait, you just transferred, you know, and it just dissipated. So the 5% really, it probably isn't enough, but it's something to have in the bank. And you have to provide periodic accountings of what you're doing with the money as well.
Okay.
I don't think that you require approval for the sale of development rights from the Attorney General. I mean, certainly you do if you're selling the whole fee parcel or the landmark, but I don't think just development rights sales.
Yeah,
implicate
I
that.
think it depends on whether the sale is I think it's what all or substantially all. So usually it doesn't get triggered.
Okay, well, we're over time. Thank you everyone for coming, and we hope to hear from you again.